Good morning. Welcome to the Shir this evening, haMoed Sukkos. I'd like to dedicate this Shir for the Refuah Shleimo for a young boy who's was involved in a road accident. His name is Mendel Ben Leah. Should be Zocher to Refuah Shleimo Krova. Let's go to our first question now. I know it's very past Yom Kippur, but because several people asked me this question, therefore I felt a good idea to address it. And that is about preparing food on Yom Kippur. So several people asked this question about taking food out of the freezer, cutting up, putting on the tables, etc. Then one variation of this is whether you can use the services of a goy. So let's go. So this is just for educational purpose. Because next Yom Kippur, so we'll have to refresh on that. But here we have a din in the Gemara, the concept of knivas yerek, of trimming and cutting up vegetables, and this was permitted, although normally hachana mikodesh l'chol isn't allowed, but we do have an exception here. That on Yom Kippur, in order to minimize the agmas nefesh, the discomfort, etc., of people having to wait until the food is ready, so in the Zman HaGemara, it was permitted to chop vegetables of sorts, to trim them, and to crack nuts to have for Motzei Yom Kippur. So here we have, however, that Achshav, the Alter Rebbe, this is in Siman Tov Resh Yud Aleph, that nowadays it's become customary to forbid the preparing of vegetables, etc., other preparations of food even after mincha, because in later generations people started preparing earlier on in the day, and the heter in the Gemara is only after mincha, and therefore it was banned totally. So that's the way it remains in the minhag in Shulchan Aruch, that there is no preparation of food on Yom Kippur for Motzei Yom Kippur. Yet I see here in the Nite Gavriel that he writes that you would be allowed to touch food is not muksa Yom Kippur, and therefore to take food out of the fridge, that they should be ready for after nightfall. He says that is okay. He permits it. Fine. So whereas cutting up would not be allowed, that's more engaging, if that's the right word. But if it's just moving it from A to B, that's okay. Now, the other point 2 on my list, is about taking food out of the freezer on day 1 of Yom Tov for day 2 of Yom Tov. In other words, Yom Tov is going to be Monday and Tuesday. So to take out food on Shmini Atzeres afternoon, to take it out from the freezer, that should be defrosted by Tuesday night. So I've looked into this a while ago, and my feeling is that it is permitted. And the reason is that when you remove it, it doesn't actually become ready the moment you remove it from the freezer. You take it out, and then it's going to become ready by defrosting, and that's going to happen by itself, so to speak. So the act of removing it from the freezer is not considered a hachana in itself. The fact that later, of course, it's going to defrost by itself, but that's happening by itself, and therefore that's the basis of the heter, if necessary, to take food out of the freezer to defrost until nightfall. Of course, if you're going to defrost it earlier, that you can have some of it before sunset, of course, that is more glad, but even if that's not possible, for whatever reason, or not practical, it's all very well to take out one kugel for a family. But if you have a campus and you've got 50, 60 students, you've got a whole bunch of kugelach. And you can't start saying, oh, I have 2 pieces and get a bite of each kugel. That doesn't not be very practical. Okay, let's go on to the next question. And that is also a Yom Kippur Shaila. Shliach called me on the day after Yom Kippur that at Kol Nidrei, one of the Sefer Torah slipped to the floor. And as would be the reaction in any frum community, in so the people are upset, and what do we have to fast, etc. The interesting thing is that because you've got a Yom Kippur, you're going into a fast. So does the fast of Yom Kippur count for the fast, which is a tikkun for the Kehillah, for the Sefer Torah that fell? So what we have here on the screen, you have here from the, this is in Hilchos Shabbos. I think it's Siman Reish Peiches, which talks about Tanis Chaloim. And if a person had a dream which is so worrying that warrants them to fast, so they would fast the following day. So now in the Mishnah Berurah there, he addresses what happens if Sunday is in any case to fast. So do you have to, so Sunday's on Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. Does the person have to fast? In other words, all right, let's recap. If a person fasts the Tanis Chaloim on Shabbos, he has to fast another day to rectify having fasted on Shabbos. So the question is, that fast for rectifying, if it happens to be the following day is a fast in any case, does it count or not? So the first opinion quoted in the Mishnah Berurah says it doesn't count, because he was going to fast in any case. But Yesh Chol Kanal, and the others disagree, and they say a fast which is a Tanis Choiva, which is incumbent in any case, it still counts. And should have in mind that that fast is also going to be an atonement for having fasted on Shabbos. And Mishnah Berurah sums up, so you can rely, if necessary, you can rely on the Tanis Tzibur to double up, so to speak, for the Chiva fasting because of there's a Tanis Chale. Before I saw this in the Mishnah Berurah, I saw in another Sefer called the Sefer Meir Oiz, looking around. And here's to get a little bit more interesting, because it's not just a fast. Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. It's a Tzuma Shel Yom Chaper. So there are those who take the view that the Tzuma Shel Yom Chaper, that because it's Yom Kippur, that in itself is enough that you shouldn't have to fast. So here we have two views on that. Okay. But there is certainly a lenient view here. And then, as I was browsing, looking for something else, I saw that Nite Gavriel on Yom Kippur, on the volume on Yom Kippur, also addresses this. He has an entry here, some bit more detail. And he says, if a Sefer Torah fell on Yom Kippur, so the person who actually dropped it, that he should be fasting after Yom Kippur. The rest of the people who were present are exempt. They don't have to fast. So he's relying on the lenient opinions. Some say they should fast, etc. So here we have, I think, a bit of a balance, that the one who actually dropped the Sefer Torah, who is complicit, so to speak, in the dropping of the Sefer Torah, should fast after Yom Kippur, choose a day. But the rest of the people, we've got ample basis to say that they don't have to fast because they're fasting Yom Kippur in any case. Okay, let's go on to Sukkos. And here, the question I was asked about was, if a goy puts up the schach, is the sukkah valid? Now, on the screen, you've got Siman Tov Reish Lamed Vov, which talks about a sukkah which is a sukkah yashana. It's more than 30. It was built a long while ago. And there's a whole business of lechadesh, to kind of do something, to add a bit of schach or something to kind of rejuvenate it, lekovid the Yom Tov. The previous siman, Tov Reish Lamed Hey, talks about Sukkas Ganvach Rakvash. Ganvach stands for Goyim Noshim. Burgin, I think, and then Kusim. So there it says, Sukkas Ganvach is kosher. If a goy builds a sukkah, it's kosher. So then Mishnah Berurah says, just like a sukkah yashana, one should do a chidush, ma'aseh chidush. So the same thing, sukkahs hanochrim, also hidur mitzvah, you should be mechadesh, you should do something to rejuvenate. But now let's take a look. This is a quote from the Sdei haMoed, and he writes the following. This is Sdei haMoed in the volume where the section on sukkah. So he writes, if he's quoting here from Reb Chaim Falaji, who was, I believe, in one of the Rabbonim in Turkey, a very prominent posek going back 150 years ago. Are you allowed to build a sukkah by a goy? If the goy builds a sukkah without a yid present, pshit of the psula. Rav Chaim Fadai says, obviously it's possible. Well, one has to know if you tell a goyish worker to do it for you, then that's I'm not sure about. On this, the Stei haMoed, who lived not long after him, he writes, I don't understand what he's saying. Look at Tofresh Lamed, that Sukkos akum k'sheira. Even if a goy builds a sukkah, he builds it as a shelter, so it's kosher. You don't need to have a Eid there present. So what's this business? If a goy makes a sukkah, it's possible. And I saw also in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, quoting from Rav Elyashiv, saying that a sukkah schach placed by a goy is possible. And again, the question, why? Now, possibly, it is imperative that the sukkah is built as a shelter, not as a roof, which is waterproof, not just for privacy, but as a shelter from the sun, etc. When a goy builds somewhere in the countryside, he builds a shelter, and you happen to be in Sukkos taking a hike, and that you see this shelter which the goy built, that sukkah was built as a cell, as a shelter. That's fine. But if a goy builds a sukkah not for a shelter, well, then we have a question: is that valid? That's I think where these poskim are coming. A goy puts up a sukkah, and he doesn't know that it's for a shelter. He just, the Jewish employer needs this thing, and he doesn't know what it's for. He doesn't understand. So then they're saying, well, it's possible. Now, having said that, I have a problem with that chumrah, because I would say that if you go around the shul and ask people, why do you build a sukkah? They'll probably say, because that's a Jewish thing to do. They won't say it's for a shelter from the element, it's a shelter not from rain, and shelter not from, they'll tell you to do a sukkah because it's a mitzvah to build a sukkah. They don't think that the sukkah is for a shelter. So why should it be, if a goy builds a sukkah, l'shem sukkah, he's doing it because the yid wants a sukkah. At any rate, so the pashtus, it seems to be that if a goy is employed by you to put up schach, the schach is kosher, not worse than if he had built a shelter on his own. And then there's a mile to make a chiddush, to do some kind of adjustment. And that's not a major change. There's a little bit of, he talks there about a tefach al tefach of schach, something, a little bit of a addition, adding a bit of schach to the goy's sukkah, to the goy's schach, and that's adequate. That's min adin, of course. L'chatchila, we do it ourselves, and fine. Let's move on. Oh, someone's asked here. Someone's asking if someone didn't fast on Tanis Esther, for example, a chosen, should he make up the fast which he's missed? Can he use a Tanis choivo to make up? So he's getting married on Tanis Esther, I presume you're talking about, and he didn't fast. The Moshe chosen gets married on Rosh Chodesh. He doesn't fast. So there the minhag is to fast a day in advance. So you're asking what would be if the day in advance would be a time. Let's say he's getting married on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis Tevis. No, but then he's if it's a Rosh Chodesh, I have to get the facts right. How could it be this shaila? Yeah, when would there be a Tanis Choivo? Marriage on the 11th, yes, but why didn't you fast? Why isn't there fast on the day of the chasana? Okay, let's leave it for another time, because I didn't prepare for that and might get it wrong. So I guess. Okay, so on Erev Yom Tov, one of my contacts asks me, "What's the minhag when you make kiddush and you say Halei Sheva Sukkah? Does the family also say, are they yotze with your leisha v'sukkah at Kiddush, or do they make their own leisha v'sukkah? So this has been circulated on various madrichim, etc., English, Hebrew, and this is from there's a sefer called Halacha Minhagei Chabad. I'm just going to show it to you on the screen. Halacha Minhagei Chabad. This is basically taken from the his Kashrus journal, which comes out every week. It has a section called Luach HaShavua, was compiled primarily by Rabbi Yossi Ginsburg from Omer, and he writes this. This is from that sefer. So whereas the one who makes Kiddush says Leisha V'Sukkah right after Kiddush, but the rest of those who are present will make their own bracha Leisha V'Sukkah after haMoed. I never saw that at home. I've never noticed that, though. There should be a point that everyone should make their own Leisha V'Sukkah, the Yotze with the Kiddush, the Yotze also from with the Leisha V'Sukkah. Let's discuss this a little bit. So here, the quote which we have at the bottom on the left of the page is from the Sefer Mate Moshe. It's a Talmud of Marshall. It's putting about 400 years ago plus. Leisha V'Sukkah said on the V'chem base. So he's saying that Leisha V'Sukkah is said at Kiddush before you start eating. Now, a couple of points here. Number one, I take exception to people establishing a minig Chabad without having a source in Sifrei Chabad. Minig Chabad is established by the Rabbeim. If you have a hachra, one way or the other, you're entitled to make your hachra, your evaluation. But to say that this is minig Chabad, well, where's your source in minig Chabad? That is indeed the way to decide. Fine. I saw in Rabbi Broin's manuals, he writes that he has also taken this view, and he's addressed it at some Kinnas Torah, and it will be published in his forthcoming sefer, I guess, called Astra the Rav. Fine. I didn't manage to read it, but let's just read the notes here. 353. The Minogenu, Hamakadesh, the one who makes Kiddush, says Leisha V'Sukkah at Kiddush. That's because he's drinking the wine, and the wine is a kvias. And that's why we also make Leisha V'Sukkah at Kiddush by day with the wine. But the other people, they're not drinking so much wine. I don't know, that's their argument. I don't know how much wine you have to drink to be Yotze for Kiddush. You don't have to have a revius yain. So I don't see that being a compelling argument. What I do know is that there is a maila in saying Leisha V'Sukkah before you start eating. That's the Shittas Rambam, that you should say Leisha V'Sukkah before you start. So there is a maila, although that's not our minig when you're not making Kiddush. So we say Leisha V'Sukkah after haMoed, but there is a maila in Ovel Asiyos to say Leisha V'Sukkah before you sit down. So when we say Leisha V'Sukkah before sitting down, we've been Yotze the other Shitta also. My other concern is that sometimes you've got, especially the Ezras Noshim, which are going in and out of the sukkah, they're having a little bit in, out. Will they have a shear of a kabei of the oid to be yotze, the mitzvah of Leisha V'Sukkah to justify their bracha? If they're not going to, it's a little bit not so clear, it may be better for them to be yotze of Leisha V'Sukkah, monavshach. If they will stay on in the sukkah enough time to have a kabei of oid within the time frame of bread, then there's a fine. There's a yotze. If they don't, so there's no question of bracha levatola because they didn't say bracha. They were just yotze from someone else. So I'm not so hot on this hachroa that the rest of the family should have to make their own Leisha V'Sukkah. I can see there's merits in that, but I can see also merits in the way I saw at home is that the father makes the Kiddush and Leisha Vasukkah, and everyone else is Yotze, as far as I remember. Yeah. Let's move on. So here, out of Sukkos, I get a question, a photograph with a so the sukkah, the esrog has a stalk, and the stalk is where it's connected to the tree. The esrog tree is more like a bush than a tree, but fine. And the stalk fell off. So is the esrog kosher? So here we look at, this is from Tov Reish Mem Ches, simin about esrog, where it says if the uketz, if the stalk fell off, then if it leaves now a recess, whatever, into the esrog, mishum gumo bi esrog, so the esrog is called esrog choser. So then that would make the esrog possible. V'yesh machshirim. Some say no, the uketz is not the esrog proper; it's extra to the esrog. And even if there is a recess over here, that does not invalidate the esrog. It's only if the flesh of the esrog proper is missing. The halacha is not like the lenient opinion. The halacha is like the first opinion, that if the uketz is missing, it is possible. Then you could use such an esrog and make a brocha. Okay. Now, I looked also into a possibility of using a bit of glue and gluing the stalk back into place. So some say yes, some say no. So you still don't get a clear consensus whether gluing is going to solve your problem. All right, so I told him better not to use it on the first day. First day, second day, chutzlorts also. For the rest of Sukkos, so here you have a rule as far as psulim, between what's the difference between the first day or days and the rest of Sukkos. There is a pasuk called a kachtem lochem. And from this we learn the kichotamo, that the esrog should be intact. That applies only to the first day. The dinim, which are got to do with hidur, and lacking of hidur, that applies to the whole of Sukkot. So each disqualification of the esrog, we're going to have to decide what is this psul. Is it because of tamimus or is it because of hidur? If it's because of, so let's read inside. Kol shad varm psul psulim chalachim gufoy possible other psulim is disqualify first day, the rest evidence. Chutz mi psul machmas chesar. If it's possible because it's missing a piece, like a hole or a bit of a hole through the esrog, a piece, a chunk missing from the esrog, or if there's a recess because the uketz has been pulled out, that is a problem only of tmimus, and that's kosher for the rest of Sukkos. The pitum, by contrast, the missing pitum, is not only a problem of missing something, but also it's lacking hidur. Therefore, a lost pitum would be a psul for the whole of Sukkos, whereas the missing uketz is only possible in the first days. I'm not going to go into the whole discussion about how much of the pitum chopped off would be invalidating the esrog, but that's another discussion. Not every bit of the pitum missing makes it a possible kol alma. Someone came to me today, actually, it was a young boy under bar mitzvah. His pitum was off. I told him he can make a bracha on it. And that seems to be the Alter Rebbe's psak, that you can make a bracha if the bit, if it's only the bit which is outside the esrog is missing, but there's nothing missing for the esrog proper, it's okay. Okay. In anticipation of this shir, I had some questions from some shluchim who do not have a minyan, don't anticipate a minyan, or didn't have a minyan, and two or three questions. One is about Kriyas HaTorah. So, when there's no minyan, so here we have a halacha. This is from the Sefer Tanya Rabsi, which is also quoted in the Magen Avraham, I believe, in the beginning of Siman Kuf Mem Gimel, that if you don't have a minyan, then it's a minhag to read from a chumash. without brachas, neither before or after. That's when there's no chumash, no Sefer Torah. If you want, I believe, if you want to take out a Sefer Torah to do the same, I don't see a problem with that. So some shluchim don't have a minyan and do have a Sefer Torah. Some don't have either. But you can do, and it's recommended that shaloi tishtachach, the concept of Kriyas HaTorah shouldn't be forgotten, that at the slot in davening where you would have done Kriyas HaTorah, so you take a chumash and you read the relevant parsha. Here we have in the Kaf HaChaim, he's quoting from I think from Shara Knesset Sagdola, Minig of Izmir, which is in Turkey, when they would have to run away to the villages because of a plague in town, and for some reason they weren't able to take up Sefer Torah, but they had a minyan out there, it looks like. They would read, the Chazan would read a parsha from the Chumash and also do the Haftorah. So yes, so when there's no minyan, still recommended to go through the parsha and also the Haftorah. Some shluchim have told me that actually they find it very rewarding because of Kriyas HaTorah, you can't really expect, but if they've got a few Mekuravim have come, not enough for a minyan, so they'll go through the parsha and discuss it, and it can be very meaningful. But I want to address this union of Haftorah. We have a minig Chabad that when it comes to Mavis Seder, so we do the Haftorah when sometimes there's the Haftorah of that week is pushed over. Let's say when you got two Sedras combined. So one Haftorah is recited, usually the latter one, and the other one is pushed aside. But in Mavis Seder, you'll do both. Similarly, if let's say it's Arba Parshas or whatever it may, Shabbos or Chodesh, so in Mavis Seder we'll do also the Haftorah which is not being read. Now, looking at Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Simaresh Pehei, you see here that really you don't have to do Mavis Seder, you don't have to do the Haftorah part of Mavis Seder, but the minig is to do so just in case you're called up to the Torah. So then, if it's only because you might get called up, so then why do you have to read the Hamafta which you're not going to get called up to? The way I understand this is that the idea of Mavis Seder, Chalo Kriyas HaTorah, if you wouldn't have Kriyas HaTorah, there'd be parts of the Torah which would be unfamiliar. So you have Kriyas HaTorah, you familiarize yourself, you build up your knowledge. Mavis Seder, so you memorize it, you go through it, so it helps you register. Similarly, there's a repertoire of Novi, which is important for us to know. So even if, for technical reasons, that Haftorah wasn't read this year, but it's still part of the repertoire which we should be familiar with, and therefore we should read it. And that's my understanding of why it's Minig Chabad to read the Haftorah in Mavis Seder, to read the Haftorah, even though that's not going to be read at Shabbos Shul. So coming back to the Shliach who's in a place where he doesn't have a minyan, etc., but still, just like there's an inyan of reading the Torah, well, similarly, the Haftorah is also something important. I'm not going to say it's the same, but it is something important. Okay, right. So let's go on now to our next question. They asked about Hashinus without a shul. How do you do Hashinus at home? So again, we have here from Kaf HaChaim, Hashinus comes up in Siman Tofresh Samach and in Tofresh Samach Daled. The second one is about Hoshana Rabbah. Neither of them are in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, unfortunately. What we have here in front of us is from the Kaf HaChaim, I think it's Tofresh Samach, and he says the following. Those people who are not going to shul because of oinus, he says, if you just put a chair and go around a chair, that's a nonsense, he says. But if someone is not able to go around the bima in shul, if he puts a chair and he puts a Sefer Tanakh on the chair, so then that's one way of observing the Hakafa, the mitzvah of Hakafa. Then he says that's from an earlier source. Then he says if you have a table which resembles, no, it's more than a chair, it's more like the bima in shul, and you go around the table where in the house, that's the way of observing the minig of Hakafas. So really, I mean, it's actually very beautiful now, and I'm thinking about it. that the shulchan is doimel mizbeach. I'm not going to the whole Gemara based upon the pasuk in Cheskel. The shulchan is doimel mizbeach. The reason why we go around the bima in shul is in commemorating of the minig in the Beis Hamikdash, where they would go around the mizbeach. And just like the mizbeach is in the center of the yard in front of the heichal, so too we have the bima. It is the center of the shul, so we go around the bima, which is the equivalent, or so the substitute, so to speak. All right, so a table, shulchan doimel mizbeach, it has the same thing. Yeah. So if you're not able to go to shul, you go around the table, and you have, especially if you have a sefer on the table, that's your a good substitute for the minig of hakafas. Okay. Now we go on to the minha. So also people are asking about doing yizker without a minyan. You know what? In some younger shuls, there is never a minyan for yizker, because most of the people go out, and for yizker there's less than a minyan. Can you take out a sefer? You don't have a minyan. Can you take out a sefer Torah for yizker? I don't. If that's going to make people baruikt, I don't have a problem with that. Right now, minig Chabad is not to say was it today? Was it yesterday? Of not to say Hoshanos on Shabbos. Instead, on Sunday, before saying the Hoshana of that day, you say the Hoshana of yesterday, but we don't go around the bima for the recital of yesterday. We just go around the bima for the recital of today. The question which comes up is that this year, Shabbos is the 6th day of Sukkos, and Sunday is Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah, you're saying all 7 hakafas, all 6 hakafas in any case. So what do you do, Hoshana Rabbah? How do you compensate for yesterday? So this I dug up from his kashas from a few years ago, same kviyas in Tofshin Pei, and he says that in Tofshin Nun Beis, which was the same as this year, same kviyas, now they noticed, some say that they noticed, that the Rebbe first read the Hoshana of the 6th day, which is Adoma Me'ered, which is day 6, and then afterwards he went to the Hoshana of Yom Aleph and continued with the Hakafah. So that's one way of doing it. Right. Let's move on. So someone asks me a question: can a manicurist work on haMoed, and can they take payment for it? I didn't fully understand the question. I wrote to him that if the person is cutting nails, you don't cut nails on haMoed unless it's there are circumstances where you can allowed to cut nails. Normally you don't cut nails in haMoed. Then it says, what about putting on makeup, how you say, lacquer, nail polish? Now, is a woman allowed to put on nail polish in haMoed? She's allowed to, yes. If she wants to do it, she's allowed to. Yeah, it makes it, she feels simcha sachag, that's okay. Are you allowed to charge for doing this service? So, I once had a little psak. Psak in Yiddish, I don't know how you say it in English. Psak. But I did one haMoed, I did about 10 hours editing work, which I would charge per hour, I'd invoice per hour. Then after these 10 hours, then I thought, oh, hang on a second, am I allowed to charge for my time in haMoed? And I came to the conclusion, no, that you're not allowed to charge for your time in haMoed. So someone else benefited from those 10 hours without being invoiced. So one shouldn't be charging for time in haMoed unless there can be circumstances. Let's say they can't find someone to do it for free, and so then you're allowed to take a charge for your time. But normally one shouldn't be charging for services provided in haMoed. I'm reading here from Rabbi Forkash's in haMoed Hilchos. he writes the following. There are those who say that the issur to charge a wage is for things which are not l'tzorech haMoed. Although you're allowed to do it for yourself, because they're not malacha, but you're not allowed to charge for that. But if it's l'tzorech haMoed, then you are allowed to charge for it. The Ma'aser Poskim say in Shas Chak, you can't find anyone to do it for free, and it's necessary to do it on Chol haMoed, then you are allowed to charge for it. All right. So again, if it is a tzorech haMoed, let's say this person, this cosmetic thing is a tzorech haMoed, it can't wait till after Yom Tov, and it has to be done by a professional. All right, that there may be justification that professional charging for her services. People in my position don't understand why it's such an urgent thing to have to do it in a professional way, during Chol haMoed. But that's Okay, let's go on. So here's a question. A Jew has been out of work, and now it's come his way an opportunity to work as a manager in a non-kosher, in sales of non-kosher food. So is he allowed to do so? So we have a siman in Kuf Yud Zayin Yeredeya, not to trade with Dvorim Ha'asurim. If it's also Min HaTorah. If food which is forbidden Min HaTorah to eat, you're not allowed to lechatchila make a trade out of that. If it comes incidental, let's say you're catching fish and you also catch some lobsters, you're allowed to sell them. But lechatchila to trade in lobsters, you're not allowed to. Yeah. So now, is there a reason for this? Of course, there's a reason. Yeah. Is the reason because that a Yid should not be making parnosa from treifa food? Or is it that when you're engaging with the treifa food, you might, by mistake, be tempted to eat it? So these are two questions, two possibilities. So, Marshall, is it allowed for a Jewish boy or girl to work in a Goyish deli? It's not there. They're not trading, but the chashash they might put some food in the mouth is very, very real. And the other way around, if you are remote, you're just buying chazer from here and sending it to another place, and you don't even see it. So there's a whole discussion about this. Lepoyel, we are machmer on both sides. Whether it is trading, you are buying and selling, or you are actually on the shop floor, either way one should. Now, in this case of this question of being a manager, he's not the owner, so then that side of it doesn't apply. The other side of it, is it in the kind of food which is open, you might sometimes take something in your mouth, then the answer would be not okay. But if it's packaged food which is being sold in packets, brought in, basically trade, but not on a retail level, then that would be okay. There's a tshuva Nigras Moshe about this. He takes that view that it's neither schoire and nor is it the chashash might eat from it. That would be okay. The last question on the list, I have another one which I want to share with you, and that is: should a woman be removing her rings before washing Negel Vasser in the morning? So there are those who are a little bit lenient about this, but what we see in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, he says that whatever is an impediment for Netilas Yadayim L'Seuda is also applies the same for Netilas Yadayim in the morning. It should be Koyach Keli and Koyach Odom, and talk about touching the Keli. So does she have to sleep off if a woman does go to sleep with her rings? If she does she could wash Negel Vasser with her rings on, but before she does the second Negel Vasser, which she makes a bracha, just like she removes her rings before Netilas Yadayim for a meal, she should also remove her rings before Negel Vasser, upon which she makes a bracha. Having said that, there are those poskim who say that the reason why you have to remove a ring is because when you're going to be making a dough, you'd remove the ring. Some women don't remove the rings even when they're making a dough. So there is room to be makel and not to remove the rings and say it's not a chatzitza altogether. Generally, we don't follow that, and especially, in mikveh, etc. So generally, women do remove their rings for Netilas Yadayim the Suda. So by the same token, they should remove them before Netilas Yadayim in the morning when they're going to make a bracha thereafter. One last thing which I want to just as a bonus. Oh, so here we have a whole thing about, right. So someone asked me today about Hoshana, and that is, if you read Hayom Yom, was it yesterday, it says that the minute, I think it's today perhaps, that we begin the circuit either by the letter Samach or by the letter Ayin. I don't know whether I mentioned this last week. I don't know. About why Samach or Ayin? No? Okay, I read a fascinating article. Someone by the name of Mendel writes this. He lives in Kiryat Gat, and he points to a Tzemach Tzedek in Eira Torah, and he shows where the days of Tishrei until Shmini Atzeres are 22 days, and they correspond to the 22-day letters of the Aleph base. So as it's a Tzedek, if you count from, so the first day of Sukkos is going to correspond to the letter Samach. Samach stands for Sukkah. Very nice. So if that's the case, then we've got a nice word here. That when do we start a shyness? The first day of Sukkos. So therefore, we start the circuit by the letter Samach. But if the first day of Sukkos is Shabbos, so when do we start circling with the Hashyness? On the second day, on Yom Tezayin, which is corresponding to the letter Ayin. Okay, so that's why that's the background to the minhag. That's his theory. That's why the minhag Chabad is to start circling either by the letter Samach or by the letter Ayin. And of course, now we're going to start making a whole new shot that it depends what type of kviyas it is, whether you start by Samach or Ayin. Before you take this too seriously, in 770, they used to actually start by the letter Nun. And the simple reason was because it was such a big crowd, they needed to have a bit more to say to be able to finish it, to able to do the circuit while saying the Hashyness. But that's not what I wanted to share with you today. The question was that in Hayom Yom it says that Hoshano said before the phrase and after the phrase is only when the Chazan says aloud. So we say also Hoshano, Seirim lo ani Hoshano, Hoshano, Anonymous lo hamni Hoshano, whatever. But the earlier part, Hoshano l'man amitoch, Hoshano l'man brisach, Hoshano l'man dosach, we don't say Hoshano twice, only the parts which are said aloud with the Chazan, and is asking the reason for this. Now, on the left, you have here a quote from a sefer called Oitze Meforshe Hashyness. I saw it in the shop. It was about 500 pages, a commentary on the Hashyness. I didn't buy it because I've got it on the computer in any case. But here he brings various minhagim about when to say Hoshana twice, Hoshana once. My theory is the following, and it's not written there, and that is that the Chazan would say Hoshano l'man chalikeinu, and the Tzibur he would respond Hoshano, and then he say Hoshano l'man chabereinu, and everyone would say Hoshano, because not everyone knew all the details by heart. So the Chazan would say aloud the phrase, and everyone else would join in Hoshano, like the Rambam says about Halal. Then the Chanukah talks about how people would respond, the chorus. So possibly this is my theory, that the repeating Hoshano at the end is reminiscent of when the Tzibur would respond to the Chazan. The Chazan would prompt them Hoshano l'man such and such, and they would say Hoshano. And therefore, it makes perfect sense that Dafka, when the Chazan is leading the Tzibur going around the Bima and Hoshano l'man for this whatever it may be, and then those we say Hoshano twice. Whereas when it's not said aloud, each one on their own, then you just say Hoshana once. The Abrishas will help them that we should have we should be the Hoshana, the full Yeshua, and Mashiach Tzedkenu, we should celebrate the end of Chag Sukkos, the Mashiach Tzidkenu in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, here in Mamish. A gute Woche, Kol Tov.
Go ahead.
Kol Tov.